Just the classics on OverDrive. Not the classic voices that you regularly hear. Hayes, Noodles, and O-Dog have family day off, but one of the members of my TSN family, Dave Feschuk, joining me, Brendan Dunlop, here as we head into hour 3. We're going to talk a little more puck with Chris Johnston is going to join us. We'll talk with Josh Kloke, so obviously I'm going to take it down a soccer angle after we get through the Leafs, but I tell you what I've enjoyed about this family day, how much matinee hockey, not just the Leafs that we've come out of here on TSN 1050, but the fact that now some of these live score lines or just finished are insane, man. Matinees, unpredictable.
Yeah, really. Like this Canucks Wild game in Minnesota is an absolute
barn burner.
I don't even know if it's a barn burner. It is wild. I'll say that. the Wild made it wild because they scored 7 goals in the third period to win 10-7.
Like that sounds made up.
Think about that. 7 goals in the third period to win 10-7. All on Casey DeSmith, as far as I can tell here. I didn't obviously watch the game. I'm just looking at the score sheet here.
Imagine being a gambler, like before FanDuel, right?
Yeah.
Before the wire, where you could find out when you have to listen to the breaks, the updates on the radio station at the top and bottom of every hour just to find out your score.
Right.
Imagine being that guy who's like on the one side. You're on the Canucks side. They're red hot, best team in the league. Like, oh yeah, they're totally not losing. And then you find that score out 30 minutes, 2 hours later, and you're like, what happened in the third period? You got to be kidding me.
No, I know. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. I can't wait to hear Rick Tockett's post-game analysis of that one.
Yeah, honestly.
He's always a pretty straight shooter, and I'm sure he will not be particularly happy with his team on the defensive side of the puck after allowing 7 in the final frame.
Man, we say this all the time, and it's such a cliche that hockey players, creatures of habit. Yeah, I think most people are creatures of habit. We're raised that way. We go to school in the daytime hours. Most people are pushed into 9-to-5 jobs. Yes, that's just how it works, that we're creatures of habit. But then when you do things like have a matinee on a Monday in the middle of a stretch where they played less than 48 hours ago because the Canucks played Saturday night, it's like you are going to get these.
You're going to get these weird. Yeah, you're right.
Which, hey, it's cool unless you're, you gamble for a living and you need things to be somewhat predictable in this wild world.
Well, the Raptors used to use that as a bit of a hometown event.
Sunday.
They had a lot of Sunday matinees.
12:30.
12:30, and there was legendary that the visiting teams that have some awfully fun times in a very nice city in Toronto. The night before, they'd roll in there, and you could almost, you could smell what they've been up to the night before, if you catch my drift. And the Raptors kind of used it as, hey, we go out in Toronto whenever we feel like it. We don't have to go out on Saturday nights. These guys all come in, and we can take advantage of that. But yeah, now I guess who knows what happened here. Now, 2 of the goals, I'm looking at the score sheet a little closer here. 3 of those 7 in the third period for the Wild were on the power play. And then 2 of them were on the empty net. So it was really an 8-7 game. They scored, obviously Vancouver pulled the goalie down 8-7 and allowed 2 against. So it's not as bad as it looks. It was basically a 1-goal game down the stretch, but still pretty bad.
There are some teams that I think they think that. They're like, in this city, you catch a visiting team, especially if they're having a good season, like having an early game, we can take advantage of that. The Rangers do some noon, some 1 o'clock puck drops, particularly later in the season, right? They love to do that. The Kings love to do that. Like, those are places where people go out and enjoy themselves. But at this level, come on, we talk about this all the time. The players aren't out doing the things that those NBAers were doing before.
I don't know.
There's not as many.
Here's the thing, though. Like, you start talking to all the sports science guys in pro sports now.
And they say?
Well, they're so, like, they will put you to sleep talking about sleep patterns.
Well, normally they do, though.
Oh, yeah. Like, they're
that's why they weren't in the game for 50 years.
They're convinced it's the golden goose, right? If we can just get the players to optimize their sleep, we'd win the Stanley Cup. I'm not kidding you. Like, these guys and they'll tell you, like, if you don't get your 8 hours, these guys basically tell you, if you don't get 8 hours, like, you're going to die. Like, you are, I'm not kidding. Like, they take it so seriously. I think it's a little too serious sometimes. Like, I think there's guys when they're in their 20s that can probably have a couple hours sleep and play pretty well, but that's just me.
We're in the media, though. So someone telling you that, now you're just statistically adding up, okay, how many years have I shaved off my life? Because of what I do.
Oh, I can't bother. I don't bother with that. No, I don't bother with that. That's too depressing.
Let's join another person who I'm sure doesn't want to be reminded how little and how irregular he slept over the last couple of decades. Chris Johnston joins us. Chris, how you doing, my friend? Did you sleep 8 hours last night?
8:40, man. I'm rested and ready to go.
Look at you. Yeah, but
he's got sleep stats now.
Yeah, this also
one of
isn't
those
fair,
guys.
right? I realize, and if I asked you this like 10 years ago when we were working together, you probably would have laughed and said, "Oh, I wish I could sleep as long as you, bud." But I know that you are like disciplined. You've got a great fitness routine. Your diet is in check. Like you are living a much healthier life than I am.
I don't know if that's the case, but I certainly have come to value sleep. I will say that in my 20s, I probably wore it as a badge of honor how little I could get by on, whereas I don't stay up as late as much as I once did.
Look, the first period of that Leafs game would have put some people to sleep. But I do think that the time and that just the irregularity of that contributed to the game that we got in the end. And now it's funny when we talk about Auston Matthews, it's a surprise he didn't score more than one goal.
Surprised he didn't score more than one goal. Surprised the Leafs are now 4-0 with, during Morgan Rielly's time out of the lineup with the suspension. They're playing random players. I mean, this is why sports are awesome. I mean, you go back a week and what was the conversation around the team and in the market, and I think for good reason, don't get me wrong. But, you were going into that Rielly suspension. They ended up missing John Tavares for a couple games this week. Mitch Marner missed a game with illness. We've had some other players out, and yet they found a way. And that's, ultimately what I think a good team has to do over the course of the year. And a lot of, if you're talking about Matthews specifically, obviously a lot of the Leafs' success has come from the fact that during this week where they were without a lot of those players, I mean, look at, he has the 2 hat tricks. He still gets another big goal today. He's just put the puck in the net at a crazy rate. And at times this team hasn't had enough secondary scoring. It's been better on that front with Bobby McMahon and even Bertuzzi getting a goal, Robertson the last game. So, I mean, I think that, there's been some relief to be found in this stretch of games for Toronto. And, it's still going to be a tough road trip with games Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and all, different time zones and all that sort of stuff. But I think they're feeling pretty good about themselves after the way this last week has gone.
CJ, we were just talking before you came on about Matthews and the impact he's had this season. And the thing that really stands out to me is this guy, he racks up goals like you cannot believe. He's on pace for, 75 this year, which would be the most in this league for an awfully long time. And there are very few garbage goals, CJ. Like the Leafs need almost everyone he scores, right? Like he's been, and I had somebody from the Elias Sports Bureau break down sort of his impact goals this season, and he's on an incredible pace for high impact goals. Goals that tie a game, goals that take a lead, goals that bring you to within one. This guy specializes in them, and it got us to talking about how doesn't that sort of make him the definition of an MVP? When you're thinking about, hey, this, like, if without Matthews, where are the Leafs? And you look at the FanDuel odds, and he's the 4th favorite right now behind, Kucherov, McKinnon, and McDavid for the Hart Trophy. Where do you put him? And do you think he could make a late run here for the Hart Trophy conversation?
I absolutely think he could. I mean, it helps when you score in the bunch that he has in this last week or so, in addition to what he's done since the start of December. But when you mention no garbage goals, he doesn't even have an empty net goal this season. So he's put 49 past the goaltender this year, which is, pretty remarkable in and of itself. And, I think certainly if he gets to that 70 goal mark or above, it's going to be hard to keep him off the Hart Trophy ballot at the top. I mean, look, I get it because you can look at the scoring standings right now and he's, X amount of points behind the Kucherovs and McKinnons and McDavids. But, there's a reason that mark has not been touched since the Lemieux days, since, we've had 30 years of NHL play since this has last even been threatened. And I think the Leafs have clearly needed it. I mean, Mitch Marner certainly come on here of late, but it's just been a tough year for this team. And I think that Auston has propped them up in a lot of ways. I mean, one thing that holds back, whether it's been Draisaitl, McDavid over the years, maybe even Rantanen, McKinnon, you got Matthews, Nylander, and Marner on the Leafs. I mean, sometimes the sort of clunky definition of the Hart Trophy, where it's the player judged to be most valuable to his team, you can almost get sort of penalized in a little bit if you have another high-end teammate that you play with. But, nothing is harder in the game than scoring goals, and nobody makes it look easier than Auston Matthews. I mean, just no way around it. Like, the thing that stands out to me, Dave, is there's almost no highlight reel goals either, and I don't mean that as an insult, but it's just like he fools goaltenders with the shots that he has. I mean, there's just something uncanny about the way he shoots the puck, and they're all going by goalies, and as you say, there's not a lot of empty calories there in the numbers that he's put up this season.
Even today's goal, if you look at that, like, that's a perfect pass. Like, there's a lot of guys that are finishing that. But you're right. You could also anticipate that maybe he doesn't. If he has a weak shot and he flubs it, which isn't very often with that guy, he's just efficient. He's totally efficient. But just for those of you watching on TSN2, you can see that goal now as the Leafs. That was the go-ahead goal to make it 2-1 in what was a 4-2 win over the Blues in a matinee in St. Louis. I enjoy watching this guy. I love that with the offseason that we had and the debates about the term and how this guy doesn't want to be here and why couldn't he stay and commit for the full 8 years, and like the way that he's playing now, he told you this is the win now window, and he's playing like that. So the rest of the team has to get up to snuff. But I don't want to spend all this time on Auston Matthews. I do want to ask you about, since we were just joking about how well you sleep, you're not going to sleep very well come the start of March. The trade deadline is May 8th, so I would say from probably after the 4th, you're not sleeping any more than 8 hours in a night, Chris Johnston. But you are someone most likely to tell me whether Chris Tanev or Noah Hanifin will be traded before the deadline. So where are we with things now, and some of the trades that you're looking forward to, particularly with the Flames, who've got a couple of big guys in the shop window?
Yeah, I think it's a when, not if situation in Calgary. I mean, Craig Conroy's made it clear actually right from the beginning of the year that they don't want any repeats of the Johnny Gaudreau situation where they're walking impact players right to free agency. There have been discussions here recently with Noah Hanifin on an extension, and I think the Flames, all things being equal, would still like to do that, but he hasn't yet indicated a willingness to sign with them. And you start looking at the calendar and the number of days till March 8th, and it's dwindling. And so I think, you've gotten to the place where, the Flames have had to listen to offers on him. Obviously, the Tanev conversations have been extensive now, going back months with, a number of teams showing interest in him. The Flames are trying to get a first-round pick back for their sort of heart and soul defenseman. Only time will tell here if they're able to do that. Obviously, the market hasn't yet yielded it, which I think sort of tells you maybe the gap that exists between how the Flames see the player and how the opposing teams do. But there's always a little bit of a game of chicken involved in that too. And so, Calgary is still kind of the epicenter of a lot of the action so far. It's going to be interesting these next 2 weeks. I mean, last year, if you remember, by this stage, we were having a fairly high volume of trades, within 3 weeks of the deadline. This year feels like it's going to be a late breaking market. And I think some of it will hinge on, what the teams like Philadelphia do. Pittsburgh maybe to a lesser degree. Seattle has a number of UFAs if they get to a point where they're willing to sell. And so, I think things are kind of being held up a little bit because there's, just teams that haven't committed to which direction they're going here. But, Calgary's already made, the trade for Elias Lindholm. They dealt away Zadorov in December. And, I think they're going to make 2 or 3 more transactions between now and the deadline because, they entered this season with so many UFAs and they really are mindful of not wanting to lose those players and not get anything back in return.
CJ, there's no secret the Leafs can use D. We've been talking about it since basically day one of the season about how they need to shore up the D core. And I'm sure Brad Treliving looking around, understanding the prices are quite high for the limited supply on the market. But what's your feeling about how the Leafs are approaching this? I've heard a lot of different arguments about how they should approach it. Should they continue to mortgage the future to maximize the now with Matthews having his best season ever and Nylander having his best season ever? This may be as good as it ever gets for the core four, or do they need to be a little more conservative given all the first-round picks and franchise capital that's gone out the window in the Kyle Dubas era? Does Treliving now have to pull back the reins and say, look, we can't just sell everything for the now. We've got to think a little bit about the future or else we'll be in a really bad place in a few years. How do you think that sort of decision-making is being weighed in the Maple Leafs front office?
Well, I think the approach so far, Dave, has been they have literally canvassed the market to understand everything that's out there. I think that they have a good idea of what the prices are, obviously on the various trade boards. I mean, we're kind of aware of all the defensemen out there, but I'm sure that they've had conversations even on players that aren't maybe as apparently available. And it just seems as though they've really, put a lot of work into being ready to make those decisions. I think one thing Brad Treliving's wanted to do is kind of watch his team and see how they responded, what kind of form they were in as it got closer to March 8th. I think that's why a run like this one can be encouraging, at least if you're in the camp of people who believe that you just can't let a season like this go by without, making some moves of impact. I mean, you look historically, Treliving's not always been the most active GM, from his time in Calgary at the deadline. But, I think this is also a unique time where he's certainly doing some bargaining shopping at the moment because he doesn't have his second round picks for the next 3 drafts, and it seems reluctant to give up that first rounder. But I think if push comes to shove, there's a world where the Leafs are a little bit more active as that deadline gets closer, especially as things do seem to be turning. There's been some encouraging results. I mean, we're not all focused on the goaltending being an issue of late here with Samsonov having kind of stemmed the bleeding that was happening on his season. Obviously they're getting by with the depth of the team, and so I think ultimately they will be a team that's out there making some trades, but. I would say that the approach has maybe been, studious, thoughtful, cautious. It certainly hasn't been, go in and make a big splash just yet. But, there's still some time to see that happen. And I just think when the chips are down and when you look at the situation, it really is hard to sort of punt on any season, especially when you have the core players Leafs have. I know it hasn't produced success in the past, and we're all in the city and, we'll believe it when we see it kind of mind. But, it only has to happen once, and it's happened. I mean, that's what happened in Washington, and I think the Leafs should be thinking about that here now and seeing where they're at and where their top players are in.
If there's a goal scorer that Brad Treliving can get to support Auston Matthews if he goes dry in the playoffs, he's going to get him. And I think that if Kyle Dubas was still around, he might be doing the same thing. Kyle Dubas is in a very different situation. We watched the Penguins celebrate Jaromir Jagr and raise 68 to the rafters. Dave and I were just talking about how kind of cool that was to see the party, but the party was spoiled. They lost 2-1. They've got 55 points. They don't look like a playoff team, and it looks like Kyle Dubas has got a lot of decisions to make. Do you think he'll make any surprises, maybe make some big moves, move some big pieces before the trade deadline?
I mean, I'm sort of thinking that it's trending towards sell there. You know what I mean? Dubas himself hasn't indicated that, but I think he's been prepared for that possibility. I mean, it's kind of a unique team to do it with, right? I mean, it's one thing for us to say it in general, but you still got Crosby performing at a high level at age 36. You've got Malkin and Letang, towards the end of their careers. You're not just saying to any team, hey, we're going to pull the plug here, or we don't just see it happening this season. I mean, you've got sort of franchise cornerstones of a Jagr-like stature that are still, trying to find a bit more glory in whatever's left of their careers. But, Kyle Dubas went there on a 7-year contract at Pittsburgh, and that's a very unusual type of contract for a general manager / president to get. I think it's a sign that it was understood by all involved. He's trying to help them win the Stanley Cup in the short term while those guys are still active players, but that his job is ultimately to turn things around. And, they've already committed a first-round pick to San Jose as part of the deal they made for Erik Karlsson in the summer. So I would think with Jake Gensel coming up on free agency and it not being maybe a particularly deep group of forwards available on this trade market, at least as we sit here now, I think that it's pretty much imperative that Pittsburgh looks to trade Gensel because I do think they could replenish that first rounder plus get some other assets. And I think Dubas has always been pretty realistic about his teams. I mean, we can obviously go through individual moves and quibble about the decision making, but I think he's, pretty, tries to take the emotion out of those kind of calls. And we've all been seeing this coming on the horizon, and I suspect he has too. And it's just a matter of getting to a point where he concludes that, it's just, they're not going to get it back into playoff position because they really haven't been there since December, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, they've been 5 or 6 points out, it feels like, for a long time here. And while that doesn't look like that many when you go up to NHL.com on the standings, it's a lot to actually leapfrog that many teams and get into the playoffs.
So CJ, you're in Winnipeg. It's Jets Wild. Is that tomorrow?
It is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're going to be witnessing the Minnesota Wild coming off one of the wilder games in franchise history.
Crazy. Where
they just this afternoon scored a converted touchdown in the third period. A cool 7 goals, 3 power play goals, 2 empty netters to beat the Canucks 10-7. What do you make of this wild matinee?
I mean, it seems like this is just a strange day all around in the league. I mean, the Jets got a hat trick in Calgary from Sean Monahan in the first period, and they're down 4-3 in their game going on right now. It's 5-3 Edmonton, Arizona, and then, of course, nothing wilder than what happened with Minnesota and Vancouver. I mean, I don't know what to make of it. The Wild are actually, I didn't mention them in the previous answer, but they're one of those teams too that, I think that clearly it's Bill Guerin's preference to try to not have this become a deadline where he's selling because they did have some pretty high hopes for that team entering the season, but they just kind of been behind the 8 ball all year. They had to fire their head coach. Dean Evison earlier in the season, and haven't been able to get back into a playoff spot. So that's a massive win for them. And obviously it's nice when you have that many goals go in, a couple of guys get hat tricks in the game, and now they head up to Winnipeg here for, what's actually one of the kind of under the radar rivalries, that maybe doesn't get national attention, but Minnesota and Winnipeg always play nasty style games. We've seen some suspensions come out of their previous meetings, and there's a lot riding on it, especially from the Wild end of things where they're trying to stay in the playoff chase. So kind of a wild game. I didn't manage to see it, no pun intended. But I caught some of the highlights there, and I think it was 7 goals on 10 shots in the third period. So that's not going to do well for your save percentage.
Yeah, Casey DeSmith taking on all that water. Well, 2 of them he was out of the net for because they were empty netters, but
fair.
5 with him in the net, CJ. 3 on the power play, I guess you could say, and not a great day for anybody in the Vancouver blue and whatever they were wearing, blue and green.
I think they've won those Canucks fans know they've won a few games they weren't expecting to. So I think they're still flying pretty high.
Very true.
No one would want to come up against the Canucks in the playoffs the way that they've been playing for much of this regular season. But CJ, you said something I totally agree with, that the Jets and the Wild is a very good rivalry that's very underrated because it just doesn't catch the national spotlight. I thought the NHL did a fantastic job for the rivalry stadium series setup in New Jersey at MetLife, which will host a World Cup final in 2.5 years' time. Hosted 2 pretty cool outdoor games. And man, this trend isn't slowing down. We thought, they're overdoing it with the Winter Classic. Now the stadium series is too much. They seem to, there was a season there where there were a few less outdoor games, but now we've got one at Ohio State next year. I don't think they're stopping. And it seems like people keep eating this up.
Yeah, I mean, what they're not anymore is they're not TV games, right? I mean, none of these games, to my knowledge, are drawing massive audiences that way, but they do very well in the market where they're held. And no matter how you want to slice it, I think it was over 150,000 fans over those 2 games combined on the weekend at MetLife. So, I mean, that's there's a significant revenue, chunk to that, and obviously you get a little more attention in a market like New York by having the Rangers and Islanders play, and obviously New Jersey and Philly on Saturday as well. So, I think that you're right, that they're going to continue and the teams want them. That's the other aspect of this. As much as there's some good jokes to be made about how the Blackhawks are in every other outdoor game, including next year's Winter Classic, I mean, it does drive a lot of interest, and they still sell the tickets, and the partners really activate around it. And so, I think at the end of the day, if we want to, you or I might have our own opinions of it, but they're making money doing it. And so as long as that continues, I don't see it slowing up. And, we get one in Canada every second year. And so we're doing another one of those next year. I'm not sure where it's going to be, but, there's still some more to be announced for next season that aren't even been unveiled just yet.
Now, we've watched them build stadiums in other parts of the world where they can build them and then tear them down after 30 days. Let's do that in Banff, okay? Can we get a Battle of Alberta in Banff? That's what I want. Make that happen. Let's figure out a way to do that.
It's funny. I don't know if you know this, but that almost happened during the pandemic. That was something the NHL proposed, and I think to do with whatever the health regulations were at the time. They weren't able to pull it off, but they ended up going and having a game at Lake Tahoe under sort of similar circumstances. So, they've at least thought about it, and so that tells me there's a chance. There's always a chance, bud.
CJ, I don't know if you know this, but I am full of outstanding ideas. Multi-million-dollar ideas. I just gave Adam Silver one in the last block. It was a
good one. It was a good one, CJ. Trust me.
There you go. CJ, it's a pleasure, man. I always love talking to you. Thanks, and get some sleep in now because you won't at the beginning of March ahead of the trade deadline.
Love that. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
CJ, Chris Johnston. Love talking puck with him, and love that. Look, I guess great minds, eh? If smarter people way above the pay grade were thinking what I'm thinking about Banff, Alberta. That would have been pretty cool. And also, what a unique period that would have been to be in sports marketing, to be a sports executive. Mm-hmm. Where it's you'll never get the chance again to think outside the box. I think even the UFC, right? They want an island. Where could they find an island? How about an established multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure like Yas Marina in Abu Dhabi? Yeah. Let's just do that.
I thought, when I first heard the concept of Fight Island, though, I thought it was going to be a remote island in the jungle.
Totally.
Where, they had a octagon somewhere in the Palms, but it was just it was in Abu Dhabi and it wasn't that exotic, but still pretty cool. But yeah, it's the NBA coming up with the idea, hey, I got an idea. We'll go to Disney, make it a big bubble, and we'll have a championship. How about that? Yeah. I thought that was crazy, and they did it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things about that period of time where we look back and go, did we really do that? But from a sports perspective, pretty cool period. The hockey talk will continue. We'll talk a little soccer too, as Josh Kloke from The Athletic is going to join us next. This is OverDrive on TSN 1050 and TSN 2. We talk a lot about the time of the year. You're a guy that doesn't want holidays in February. Like, stack them up in June.
That's right.
This song reminds me of baseball.
Yes.
This is a song that is played repeatedly as part of like a summer soundtrack at Comerica Park.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's where I grew up as a kid, I would say. This makes me feel like baseball's around the corner.
Great riff.
Yeah.
And John Fogerty wrote one of the great baseball tunes, Center Field, right? Yeah.
There you go. You know what I just read? I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this. I'd not done it before. I think I'd started it years ago, but I just finished Moneyball.
Did you?
Yeah, like this week.
Okay. You're only 20 years behind the curve.
20 years behind, yeah. I bet you know what it was? I bet you I picked it up to read as soon as the trailer for the movie came out. I said, I'm not watching it until I read it. And then I never did.
Okay.
I probably read the first chapter. But yeah, Billy Beane, man.
Pretty good.
Those old baseball days. There's something nostalgic. I think everyone has this for a sport that they really gravitated to. And for me, like, you start listing off 90s baseball players. Like, if I can get down a YouTube wormhole very quickly.
Yeah.
With like some all-star introductions. Like the 95 all-star game I went down the other day. Cal Ripken. There was 18 Cleveland Indians in that all-star team. Like, man, it was solid. 95? Yeah, 95. Yeah. I'm that type of guy. You got a sport like that? Is there something where you get really excited about 70s hockey?
I mean,
80s?
I'm not that old, but yeah, I get excited about all kinds of stuff like that because I'm a bit of a sports junkie. But
big stat guy as you keep.
But you're right. Like when you're in your formative years as a kid, really falling in love with the games. That's probably the biggest era for you, right? When you first fall in love with a game. And so for me, like 80s hockey, early 90s NBA. That's kind of my wheelhouse.
And then that transcended period too, right? Once you become like legal drinking age, you're probably still into sports and you appreciate it or enjoy it a different way, or maybe you centralize. Maybe it's just one sport. So if you grew up liking the Leafs in the 80s, and then you started to, you were at a good age where you can go and have a beer and watch Doug Gilmour and Wendell Clark in the Leafs in the 90s, like, yeah, you love that period.
Hey man, there was nothing like those playoff runs when the Leafs were rolling in the early '90s and like all throughout Southern Ontario, man. Every bar was packed. Every fan was out. Those were good times.
Also because there was less distraction.
That's
right?
what I mean.
There was less going on.
Yeah, I mean, people just gravitated to sort of watching them in groups in those days. And maybe it's because I was younger too. I'm sure there's a lot of people sitting at home too. But
it's also the start of the period where they became less affordable.
That's true
90s,
too. Right? Yeah, it was never. You know what? Having grown up between Toronto and Buffalo, it was always like, we're not going to Toronto. It's too expensive. We'll go to Buffalo. Right?
Yeah. So it was always a premium at the Garden.
Right. And we did go to the Gardens occasionally, but Buffalo, you felt like you could always roll up to the Garden. I mean, to the Buffalo Memorial Odd, and later whatever they called it, KeyBank Center, and you just get a ticket for so cheap that you never felt bad about going.
Mm-hmm. Did you see more Sabres games in your life?
Yeah, I would have seen a lot more Sabres games.
Really?
Yeah, just because it was closer. It was closer and cheaper.
Right.
So
I haven't been to Buffalo like in a long time. Is Chippewa Street still a thing? Is that the bar district?
Yeah. Look, I'm not conversant in the bar district now, but I'll tell you what, that whole development around the arena and the hotels around the arena, Buffalo's got a lot going on. I mean, just ask Jack Armstrong. He's like the mayor.
Yeah,
Jack's always out. You run into Jack on the street, and he's got a crowd around him asking for autographs, and it's a good time.
You just got me thinking about something. So people know this because Jack's always on the show post game. Or when he's in the car in the middle of the day because he's driving in from the border. I can't imagine doing that type of commute. Like, I grew up in Windsor, and there are people that work in Detroit, but their drives were never like 40 minutes. Or if they were, it was a pretty good job.
Close, right? Yeah.
This guy's doing like it could be an hour. It could be 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like,
well, he comes at off hours a lot. I think
it doesn't matter. It's still it's a lot of time. I mean, just he loves his music.
Yeah.
Loves sitting in the driver's seat. I get it. Maybe there's peace there.
I'm from Niagara, so I go back and forth a lot. It used to be, you could make it in an hour from, the middle of St. Catharines to the middle of Toronto, and now it's like you're lucky to get there in 2.
Look, someone that I know loves talking about traffic just as much as I do, Josh Kloke, who I'll get into some soccer stuff, but we'll start with Leafs. But before that, Josh, I just came back from Qatar, and it is easier to drive around Doha and during a World Cup or just now in the Asian Cup, which I just came back from, than it is to drive around Toronto. And that doesn't make sense to me.
Why not?
Because I just said during a World Cup, man, it's a city that was created overnight to host a World Cup. It should not be easier to get around than Toronto.
Well, but they had a great and functional subway system, which Toronto does not.
Yeah, good point.
Right? We don't want to go deep on transit on a holiday, but I thought Qatar's subway system was excellent. It was clean. It was efficient. I don't think it'll ever get used again.
Yeah, also a good point. But it's there. There you go. See, the wealth of topics on OverDrive that you wouldn't have expected. But that's what we bring today, my friend. Great to have you on the show. It was also great to have a hockey game to watch before we started this show. It was dull for the first period, but the Leafs showed up. And for this stage of the road trip they're on right now, I think they're going to carry some good momentum. The biggest surprise being that, wow, Auston Matthews didn't hit 50 yet. We're still waiting on it.
Oh, he was going to hit 50 in Arizona. That was always the plan. That was always the plan. Auston Matthews is a smart, cunning dude, and I think he knew. And that's not to say he can, just score a hat trick whenever he wants, or I don't know, maybe he can. But it always made a lot of sense, when you saw the way he was trending, that he'd hit 50 in Arizona, where there would be undoubtedly plenty of his people watching. But that one, that goal today, Marner to Matthews felt inevitable. And even though they're missing Morgan Rielly, I think that's still my takeaway from today is as long as Auston Matthews is doing what he's doing, the Leafs have a chance, right? Because that was kind of the talking point around this team last week, 2 weeks ago, was the lack of secondary scoring. And it's almost as if Auston Matthews heard those complaints and said, don't worry, I got us for now.
Yeah, it's a great point, Josh. We've been talking all afternoon about the impact he's had, how he's not getting any garbage goals, and they're all almost always meaningful goals. The Leafs need every one of them to stay in games or win games, and they just keep coming. I mean, and yet he's fourth, Josh, in Hart Trophy odds right now. If you're a gambling man, I'm not sure if you are. How do you like the value in this guy coming down the stretch on pace for 75 to pass those three guys in front of him, of course, Kucherov, McDavid, and McKinnon?
Well, first of all, I am the most boring person to go to Vegas with. Vegas is on the upcoming road trip, and I've already told some of the traveling writers that I'm going to be of no use to them because I don't gamble. If I go up $20 at the casino, I cash out. I consider that like an all-time night for me. But it's a good question. I think the Leafs kind of spot in towards the top of the Atlantic Division over the past few seasons was a given. This season it's not, and I think some voters are probably taking that into consideration. Well, the Leafs aren't doing as well, and therefore Auston Matthews shouldn't get some votes. But I think this stretch in particular, without Morgan Rielly, who for my money on a team that's defensively shaky, when you're missing your best defenseman, to me, he's not their best player, but he might be, one of their most important players. When you can score the way that you are and you can ensure that your team is getting wins without Morgan Rielly, that has to bolster your Hart Trophy case so much more. I think there's sometimes a reticence, and you guys will both know this, to kind of go back to the same player year after year in terms of Hart Trophy voting, obviously Connor McDavid excluded, but I think there's a little bit of that. But if the Leafs keep winning and they keep kind of trying to climb up the standings, looks like they're, kind of neck and neck with Boston for now, it's going to be hard to kind of, for people to turn away from Matthews in this case, because what he's doing is not just historic for a Leaf. What he's doing and his push towards 70 is historic, full stop. I was walking towards the rink today and they've got a statue of Brett Hall out there. And I just thought he is in that conversation among the best goal scorers of the last, well, maybe all time, because it's not just one season with him, it's season after season. And 70 feels like it's going to happen. And that's wild. We just have to take a step back and appreciate it, right?
70 is insane. And honestly, if I'm a Leafs fan, I've not said this to you yet, Dave. If I'm a Leafs fan and you see them, they're third and he's carrying them through the regular season, well, this is finally something different from previous seasons. from previous regular seasons
Yeah.
where you didn't have playoff success. So maybe this is how you get it. I would hope that there's maybe some load management and that Matthews still has that in the tank that can score at remotely close to this type of clip in the playoffs. But maybe, you needed it to be different than years past. This looks different. Right?
Hey, man, it's possible. It's possible.
70, though.
Hey,
Wild.
but Kloke, before we're moving on to soccer here. But before we move on to soccer quickly, I mean, we talked about one more game without Morgan Rielly, unless Commissioner Bettman, shows some mercy and cuts the suspension short at the 11th hour. But what have you made of sort of the ragtag assemblage of Marlies that are kind of dotting the lineup of late? You wrote a piece about Marshall Rielly, who had about 11 minutes today, the Harvard product, it skates well. And he, of course, playing alongside Max Lajoie. What did you make of the bottom of the defensive rotation, and do you think those guys have any staying power with the team?
If you would have told me at the beginning of the season that in February the Leafs would have a pair of Max Lajoie and Marshall Rielly and they'd be winning games, I would have said, did they get both Hanifin and Tanev for the top pair?
Right.
Yeah. Because it's wild to me that this is happening. But the thing that sticks out to me is sometimes I think, and I've used this analogy before, but I like it. I don't know what kind of students you guys were in school, but there is the inclination sometimes when you're working on the group project to sometimes just let the best student do all the work. And you sometimes just kind of get out of the way. And I think when that happens, and we saw that, the other day with Tavares and Marner out, other people, when that isn't the case and the best student isn't there to do the work, other people just have to step up. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. I think there's a lot of players up and down the lineup. I would include Bobby McMahon in that list of players who are just saying, I have an opportunity here to really make a name for myself. And I think you can include like Marshall Rielly in that now too, because I thought he looked, he kept his head above water today. I think it's worth remembering, and I put this in my piece, like even though Kyle Dubas is gone, player development still really, really matters to the organization. They invest a lot of resources into finding guys, turning guys around, guys that we never would have heard of. Like Marshall Rielly was signed to an AHL deal in 2022. And a year and a half later, he's playing NHL games. I think that still matters to the organization. And I think Marshall Rielly, for example, is just a product of that. And I think it sends a good message to the rest of the organization that, no matter who you are, this isn't a stacked blue line. There's going to be opportunities. And I think that's why it's important that, players like Rielly get games, right?
Josh, every time I speak with you, there's an opportunity to turn this hockey talk into soccer talk. It's a 90-minute game, but I only have 90 seconds to get your take, prediction, thoughts, feelings about the Toronto FC season that kicks off shockingly on Sunday. It's here already.
Did you hear my groan? Those are my thoughts. No, that's a gut reaction. No, listen, I think that Toronto FC still have a really tall hill to climb to get back into the playoff picture, and I suppose back into like primetime relevance in Toronto. I believe they're going to finish the signing of Kevin Long soon enough. Tom Bogert and I reported that they were close on that, so there's some center back help. But the thing that's really concerning to me is this is a team that could not score for the life of them last season. The roster looks the same as last season, and this was the last place roster. So the team kind of lives and dies with the two Italian designated players. If those guys can do what they were signed to do, you bring a lot of hope back to BMO Field. But if they can't, I don't know how it gets any better because the roster looks the same. So they're betting on two players to kind of, not disappoint. But their track record suggests that that's not a given where they're at in their careers, right?
I like that. That's a very balanced way of saying, like, look, it's a new year. There's a new coach as well. Like, there's a reason to be optimistic. But a lot of things have to go right for this season to be any better than it was last season. I think a lot of I've seen the Waking the Red comment section, and a lot of people feel the same way as you, my friend. It's going to be a long season. But hey, I wish this was a longer conversation. Appreciate the Leafs takes, and thanks for always entertaining me with a little soccer talk as well, Josh.
No problem, guys. Take care.
Josh Kloke from The Athletic on the road with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and some good takes. It's gonna be a long TFC season, my friend. I'm hopeful. I hope they're kicking around 8th, 9th for that last playoff spot, but it might be long.
Well, I like the way you kind of put it, like mainstream, whatever primetime relevance in this city, because you have to go back a bit, right? Mm-hmm. Like I remember when kids were getting excited about TFC, like. Kids, like I remember my son, he's not even a soccer fan, was like, can we go watch the TFC game? And
that was 2017, am I right?
Yeah,
2018.
When they were making those playoff runs on a regular basis, right? And it was they had a really exciting team, and it was you could relate to the team, and you could get excited. You could sort of feel the buildup, and it was people were getting on board, right? Like there was a real groundswell of. It wasn't just the hardcores with TFC. The whole city was sort of getting behind them a little bit because suddenly they were relevant and they were doing things that were exciting. And they've dropped off the map now to the point where, even you guys who love the game, you and Kloke are groaning, talking about, oh boy, here we go, another season. Does it have to start now? Can they wait a few months? Because we don't really need this right now.
Good or bad, it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be worth talking about. It starts on Sunday against FC Cincinnati. Overdrive continues. One more quick break, but you're listening on TSN 1050 and watching on TSN 2. Just about to put a bow on things on Overdrive on this Family Day Monday. Brendan Dunlop alongside Dave Feschuk. We saw a rarity coming into this show with a Toronto Maple Leafs game on the air before. As you heard Joe Bowen and Jim Ralph call a 4-2 win for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Auston Matthews scoring just one goal, which means he's sitting on 49 goals for the season. And would you look at the schedule and the calendar, as Josh Kloke pointed out, very strategically, Dave, they're playing Arizona next. So he's going to get 50 at home.
Yeah. I mean, would you bet against it? You'd be nuts. I mean, he's got what? He's got a goal in 7 of the last 9, 9 of the last 12. What did you say? 31 in the last.
It's 44 in the last 31.
31. That's
coming into today.
44 in the last 31. He's on pace for 75. I mean, he's a machine.
Yeah.
And he's also he's been known to rise to the moment. Not in the playoff moment, unfortunately, but the regular season moment for sure. That's a sense of theater. So I'm picking him to score tomorrow.
The nightmare that Mullet Arena must be, though, right? Like there's only 6,000 seats in there. What, 6,500 maybe?
They're not even filling
if that. Oh yeah, of course they're not filling it, but they will when he shows up. But he also needs tickets. Yeah. So how does that work?
Great question.
They're going to allocate, an extra $250 for him. You're going to tell him no because it's we know it's not your fault. We play in a 6,000 seat arena, but we can't accommodate you.
It is an
Mr.
embarrassment.
50.
Well, we heard the Marty Walsh, the executive director of the Players Association, at the All-Star break here in Toronto a few weeks back, lambasting the NHL for continuing to make a mockery of the sport by playing their games in a college arena. It's barely even a college arena because there's a lot nicer college arenas in the States.
Yeah,
and not even filling them. With an owner who continues to promise he's going to get an arena and never seems to fulfill the promise. It's bad, but it's Auston Matthews' hometown. So for one night, maybe it can be a fun story with a rockin' arena and probably a full arena, potentially with many of the tickets paid for by Mr. Matthews himself.
Not always, and certainly not when it comes to player salary. There can be some real synergy between the NHL and the NBA. You talk about the Coyotes being an embarrassment that's talked about in boardrooms and yelled about on fan comment sites and on talk radio. But that's exactly the situation the NBA's in after that All-Star game last night.
Yeah.
I can imagine that the boardroom was a bit like, well, once they get back in the boardroom off the flights from Indiana, I guess tomorrow it would be like, hey, okay, everyone have a good weekend? Great. So, guys, about the format and just us being an all-star joke, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
We tossed out a couple of ideas. That was our poll earlier, which I think you can still vote on Overdrive 1050 on the X. Man, 2-day mini tournament. That was my idea. Bring in a couple European teams. Have 2 teams from the NBA. You can divide it however you want, East-West or USA in the world, and have them go at it. Start with 2 games on Saturday, finish it on Sunday. That's how you do it.
I like this, man. I like this. I mean, I don't think the NBA is going to go for it.
Of course not. They'd have to cut in another part.
You're cutting in the EuroLeague suddenly, and the EuroLeague they got some guys with sticky fingers and demands for deep pockets. So, but yeah, it would be a great format. I like it. I like it a lot because you got to have some stakes here. Now, the other one was financial incentives. I was very skeptical that the in-season tournament was going to work because they put up $1 million per player on the winning team.
Right.
But guess what? $1 million per player on the winning team seemed to work. And those guys took the in-season tournament games seriously. I don't know if that's what they got to do in the All-Star game. It seems pretty expensive for one game. I don't know. It's got to be $1 million. But for these guys who are all making 40, 50 million, might be the reason. Yeah. Might be the answer. I don't know. The
cash in the All-Star game for the NHL All-Star game seemed to work as a real incentive that they've got to do something different next year.
Oh, yeah.
They'll do something different. I do feel bad for Indiana, too, because they don't get a lot of big events like that. It was really special, to have it in basketball country. And then the guys go out there and give that type of show.
Yeah.
Penalize the guys from shooting from half court. If you shoot from the logo more than once, it only counts as 1 point.
Hey, man, at least Steph and Sabrina showed up. That was fun.
I'm done with ideas. And we're done for the day, my friend. I feel like I've tossed out a lot of money-making ideas for other people on this show. So
you have, man. You should be a consultant. Don't give these things away for free. There's guys making money just sort of showing up to meetings and throwing out these ideas.
You know what? This is a pretty good way to spend my family day with you, though, man. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening. This has been OverDrive on TSN, and we'll talk to you again at some point.